I was born in a small town in southern Brazil where some people still to this day go to a physical bank to pay their bills. So from this statement alone, I'm pretty sure you who are listening to us are already forming some theories on your mind, right? That's where the bias comes in. This is why we cannot rely on our biases when we are designing products for others, especially for those whose reality may be totally different from ours.
That is Arianne Anabukiand, UX strategist, Consumer Tech from WGSN, talking about how technology, and more accurately, the way we interact with technology, can help improve the lives of people from marginalized communities. And that's the topic of today's episode. You are listening to the WGSN podcast Create Tomorrow, and I am Lisa Yong, Director of Consumer Tech. Joining me on today's chat is Arianne Anabukiand, UX strategist, and Abdulrahman Hadi, UX strategist, also known as Abed. I want to kick off by finding out from my team just how technology and UX design can benefit people's lives. First, let's begin with the basics of what UX means. Arianne, as a UX researcher, how would you define UX?
For those who are not familiar with the term, UX actually stands for user experience. And what this means is when we are designing products, we want to ensure that the experience that a person is going to have using our products is most enjoyable and it has a lot of, satisfactory features in it. So people's feelings are really taken into account when we are talking about UX because let's face it, nobody wants to buy a product or have, experience on a digital service that it is hard to use or you simply kind of realize that it has no use for you at all. So it's not good for consumers. It's not good for brands.
That's such a great reminder to really put the user at the center of the design process and identify a real need and not create more problems for people. And this is especially true right now in contemporary societies, which are really becoming more complex, as well as increasingly multicultural. And we have all diverse needs to consider. And designing with empathy in mind comes with the responsibility of advocating on behalf of the user. So let's talk about designing for accessibility and inclusivity. How do we address different cultural norms and social as well? So I'd like to bring you into the conversation now, Abed. As a UX designer with a multicultural background, what's your perspective on this?
This is a great question, Lisa. So to address these differences, we should always adopt a holistic approach. This involves asking ourselves, what should we include here? And for me, it's essential to understand the specific needs and contexts, the cultural practices, the language barriers, and of course, the expectations of these different societies. So let me talk about myself here. I'm a Jordanian, born and raised in Saudi Arabia, and I have worked with international brands. And now I live here in Germany working. So having this journey helped me to form a conclusion about language, that how language alone can be a significant barrier when accessing technology due to its complexity. For example, Arabic alone has more than 12 million distinct words, while English only have 170,000. Can you imagine this? So I truly believe this language really shapes how we perceive and interact with this world. And this linguistic diversity can create challenges when designing for inclusivity. And we should acknowledge this.
That is so interesting. I believe the soul of a culture is in its language, isn't it? And I'm always fascinated with history and how ancient civilizations used symbols as well as icons to bridge these language barriers. And it's like the most basic form of user experience if you think about that. So symbology is really very much alive and well today when you consider modern emojis as a way of expressing ourselves to others.
Yeah, exactly. So this approach alone, Lisa, can inspire us to develop more accessible and interfaces. This will help us to develop more accessible interfaces and experiences. So it can then be easily using intuitive visual languages and to provide a clear localized tone of voice. We really can bridge this gap and to provide technology that is accessible and usable for everyone. So having an example here In regions with low literacy rates like Brazil and some regions in Africa, visual elements and voice interfaces really help technology to be more accessible. But we should always remember to respect these linguistics and cultural differences and understand how different languages are structured and formed. And this is the key to create a truly inclusive and effective experience.
So, what about you, Arianne? What's your approach to accessibility and inclusivity in the UX?
I think every product serves a purpose because when we talk about accessibility and inclusive UX design, we understand that accessibility is actually independent of who you are, where you are, your physical, financial, educational capabilities, because it is about enabling access to everybody, not just for those who have a disability or not. And I believe that everybody wants to live in a world where everybody has a seat on the table, right? But the way that our products and services are designed today is not exactly making this possible because we end up excluding certain individuals and not actually getting a full picture of the community. And we need to realize that every person faces the world in a different way. And when we come to a business perspective of this, every user in your consumer base uses your product in a different way. So I think this is why inclusive user research is so important. And inclusive user research, I'm actually saying that it is important for you to have a diverse panel of participants when you are doing testing and interviewing for your product development, taking into account ethnicity, gender, disability, because all of this can help designers to expand their scope to create better experiences that will satisfy a larger range of users. And I think it's important that not only UX design teams, but actually whole companies keep up to this commitment, because the way that I see it, accessibility and inclusivity is not something that should be just a tick box or a feature that is implemented in the way, in the end of a product launch. It should be considered in all the way of UX design process. So research, ideation, testing, all the way up into its launch.
That is a really important point. I think designing for accessibility and inclusion should not be an afterthought. It should really be integral to the design and development process from the very beginning. And good design is not based on the assumption that what works for the majority of users is enough. And taking into consideration all use scenarios will only make the product or experience so much better, don't you think?
Yes, exactly. And actually, I would like to share an example because for some designers, dark mode equals accessibility, right? And that's not 100% true because I myself am someone who cannot read in dark mode. The letters kind of become foggy and blurry. And I found out that's actually a name for this. It's called highlightation. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And I also learned that people with astigmatism cannot read properly in dark mode. So just giving here an anecdote. When I want to read something online and the whole website is on dark mode, I always have to copy and paste it into a Google Doc. And that's so frustrating. So although dark mode is promoted as a accessibility feature, this isn't always the best solution for everybody. So the best solution would be, please give users choices.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I'm not a big fan of the dark mode as well. And I think it's a great example of how UX design can be short-sighted without proper usability testing. So always test early and frequently with a wide pool of users. So what about you, Abed? Have you encountered similar frustrations when you're using a product or service?
Yeah, of course. Before that, I totally agree with the dark mode. I personally like it as an aesthetic, but sometimes it's really frustrating as well. So for me, one of the biggest frustration I usually face is with dark UX practices. And this dark UX is usually designed to mislead users, to do something that they don't intend to do. So we see this usually when we subscribe to a commercial service and then we decided to quit or exit this service, and we try to find the unsubscribe button or the cancellation button. And it takes us like a decade just like to define where should we click. And sometimes we think we do, but we didn't. And this is intentionally designed to be difficult. And for users who rely more on visuals like me, it is an extra tough action to do. So such a misleading practice makes users think that they have unsubscribed when they have not. And this is really hard for them. And this is a bad, I would say, practice when we want to design an inclusive design.
You're listening to the WGSN podcast Create Tomorrow. We're finding out the ways technology and UX design can affect social inclusion. I'm your host, Lisa Yong, Director of Consumer Tech. I'm joined by Arianne Anabukiand, UX strategist, and Abdulrahman Hadi, UX strategist, also known as Abed. With social inclusion, we need to focus on the significance of cultural context and acknowledge the differences in values and priorities for diverse communities from different parts of the world. In developed societies, people often form their opinions based on traditional social constructs, and inevitably we form biases about many things. So Arianne, I'd like to ask you this. What do you think is the social impact of biases?
Yes, challenging our bias, I think it's a really powerful. And let's just give you some data here. Around 2 billion people in the world to this day do not have access to the internet in 2024. This is according to World Economic Forum, by the way. Let me share something with you here. I was born in a small town in southern Brazil where some people still to this day go to a physical bank to pay their bills. So from this statement alone, I'm pretty sure you who are listening to us are already forming some theories on your mind, right? That's where the bias comes in. So these people from my hometown, they may not own a smartphone. So why do they not own a smartphone? Or they may not trust bank apps. Why is that? These are all hypotheses that I just said it in here. Only investigating and talking to them will actually give us an indication. So this is why we cannot rely on our biases when we are designing products for others, especially for those whose reality may be totally different from ours.
And as you've pointed out about internet access, we cannot assume that everyone has equal access to technology worldwide. So let's talk about the role of technology, particularly in developing or underserved communities. Abed, I know you recently attended the LEAP 2024 conference in Riyadh and wrote about the rise of Saudi femtech in the MENA region. And this is so fascinating and encouraging to hear. How do you think access to technology can empower women in these communities?
Yeah, this is true. I just came back last month and it was really interesting to see this shift. So as someone coming from that region with its rich cultural fabric, it's really crucial to understand how deeply traditions can influence daily life, especially for women who follow practices passed from their ancestors, even as they become more independent decision makers nowadays. So during my visit to LEAP, I was fascinated to see how technology has enabled women there, how coming like from that and growing up there and seeing women just like having this labelized as conservative and just like staying behind doors. It was really the opposite when I was there. Everyone was interested about technology and they were impacting the whole tech scene there.
I agree that is so important. Social inclusion is often viewed through a political as well as a Western-centric lens. And I wonder what it would be like if we address this from a technology and creative point of view. What do you think, Abed?
Yeah, that's interesting. So for my own perspective, just technology and creativity enrich each other profoundly. So historically, we as a human relied on creativity to solve our problems. We even find, so just like by creativity, we created fire and we now live this happily life. And I can say that creativity allows us to interact with our environment innovatively, finding new solutions and enhancing our experience. So we usually, as a designer, often to simplify the user journeys when we design them. I believe that we should focus on creating more experiences that encourage users to think and engage more deeply, and to ensure that technology we have today is truly accessible and meaningful at the same time.
And that's very well said. Ariana, do you see the same thing happening in Brazil or in LATAM?
Absolutely. I agree with Abed. Actually, I think that tech must always consider local differences such as culture and language. Here in Brazil, for example, we have a culture of resilience when it comes to technology, especially in low-income communities. It's actually the community who dictates how the technology will be used and not the other way around. And I think this points out in a way that we need to be very attentive to not perpetuate a culture of ableism, because brands should not approach tech in a way they are giving technology to those community like, hey, this is our new product, use it like this. Like, this doesn't work because it doesn't acknowledges the social, historical, and cultural aspects of those individuals. So the way that I see it, design is a collaborative process. Every person deserves a good and safe experience when using technology. And I believe that instead of focusing on the tech itself, product and design teams must focus on the relationship that these individuals have with technology.
And it comes back to putting the person in the center of everything, right? Technology for a purpose and technology for meaning. And we can't talk about technology these days without mentioning AI, of course, because there's just so much attention on AI. So I was wondering if AI can change how underprivileged communities interact with as well as adapt to technology. What do you both think?
For me, of course. So when unprivileged communities gain access to AI, they will likely interact with it as a unique way, in their unique ways. And based on their specific needs and context, they can define some new interactions. So for people who do not use tech on a daily basis, they might not be aware of its capabilities, but they will learn and adapt quickly. AI will become a versatile tool for them. Just as how children in these unprivileged areas use recycled materials to create their own toys or their fashion pieces from just like a random pieces around them, and to be more like being more innovative and creative. So they will find their own ways to use AI. They will leverage it for education, communication, or even businesses. The lack of predefined guidelines that we have now with AI might actually encourage them for more innovation. They will use AI in a ways that we might not be anticipated, tailored to their specific needs and circumstances. And this will create a shift when designing for inclusivity. So instead of dedicating how users should engage with AI, we should provide the tools and let them innovate. It's like teaching them how to fish rather than just giving them the fish. I think this approach will empower them to use AI to its fullest potential.
I love that. I mean, I think this idea of, giving the power back to the people of how they actually use the technology and use it in a creative and very innovative way that no company can ever imagine themselves. Yeah. Ariana, how about you?
Yeah, I would like to add to that too. I think we all are seeing this race for delivering AR features. So we are encountering some major tech companies getting themselves into trouble for misuse of user data for model training. So the way that I see it is that opt-in and opt-out should always be a clear under agreement on what the user is giving away for a product experience, right? Because from a consumer point of view, we are assuming that brands are delivering on what they promise. In this case, data privacy. And I think this can be a double-edged sword for brands. Should they try to keep up with the technology today or risk losing consumer trust? So I believe that users should always have access to their own data and a clear understanding on what type of information they are providing to a company and how this data is being used. And from a brand perspective, before implementing these AI enhancements, they should first consider whether these enhancements are something that will actually improve user experiences and solve their problems by the end of the day.
So, what's the one thing that you'd like our listeners to remember from this conversation? I bet I'll start with you first.
Yeah, for me, I always tell designers, people around me, just like you have to understand people's essence. Just like really understand what they are doing, what is their needs, their cultural background, like everything that they have as a users. And as we said, we live in a world where mixed cultures coexist closely. And when designing for inclusivity, we must consider these diverse backgrounds.
What about you, Arianne?
I believe that brands that wish to stay relevant today need to respond to the context of time and space. Like, I recently came across this term, alterity, which means otherness, from a Brazilian anthropologist called Michel Alcoforado. And I later learned that this term actually is rooted in anthropology and philosophy, that it is about seeing the other for who they really are instead of assuming they are, like bias, the way that we talked earlier, right? So I think this is a refreshing take on how designers can investigate and understand the complexities that cultural and geographic factors imply in shaping the behavior of people and communities. Because product and design teams all know that empathy is important because it enables them to share thoughts and feelings with the user. But practicing alterity is acknowledging our differences, the person who is designing and the user who is using the product.
Thanks to Arianne, UX strategist, and Abdulrahman, UX strategist, for joining us to discuss the ways we can use technology and UX design for social inclusion. If you're a WGSN subscriber, you'll find forecasts covering many of the topics we touched upon on our Consumer Tech platform. If you're not a WGSN subscriber, head to WGSN.com to discover how to subscribe to our services. We're constantly publishing new content focusing on how we can design a brighter, better future for our industries, including food and drink, interiors, fashion, and beauty. We'll be back in 2 weeks for our next episode. You can catch the CEO of WGSN, Carla Busashi, next week on our other podcast, Lives of Tomorrow, where they are discussing the emerging retail trend direct to avatar commerce.